Hello everybody, and welcome to the next in our occasional video interviews at the BTRM. My name's Moorad Choudhry, and it's my great pleasure to introduce today for this interview Mr. George Littlejohn. Hello sir. He has a long and distinguished career associated with the City of London. He was a journalist at The Economist for many years, but he has a long association with the City of London as well. And he is speaking to us today in his capacity as a senior advisor at the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, the CISI. I have to declare an interest here. I am a fellow of the CISI. In fact, I took the professional qualification, the examinations of what was then called the Securities Institute in 1992 when it was first set up. That may sound like it's quite a recent body, but it does have long antecedents. That membership, that qualification of the Securities Institute came out of the former individual membership of the Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange. And those were indeed the days. The motto of the Stock Exchange was and remains dictum meum pactum, my word is my bond. And I like to think that is a sounding, well, that is the essence of the City of London credo. So let us turn to George then. Thank you again, George, for joining us. I wanted to ask you, here we are in the midst or long-running COVID-19 crisis. There's many challenges for the City of London. We've got Brexit still, final agreement still to be determined. What are your thoughts on what challenges face the City of London today, banks and non-bank financials in the city, and how should we look to address that? Let's look at the challenges first. What would you say are the main challenges for the city now and for the foreseeable?
Well, Moorad, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a great personal pleasure to see you for the first time in, goodness, many months since the beginning of the year, and secondly, to come to Canary Wharf for the first time since February, I think. So, great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think, as you said, I used to be a journalist, but I am completely reformed now. But journalists do tend to write obituaries before people die. It's easier because it's much easier to ask them about their lives while they're still alive. And certainly one has read recently some obituaries about the city, which I think are probably premature. You mentioned the CISI and its connection with London Stock Exchange. Certainly over the years, every 15-20 years or so, I've seen obituaries for London Stock Exchange rather prematurely, because it's now, of course, a premier international institution. Perhaps it went through a difficult time when they moved to Paternoster Square and rather put the blinds down and didn't look at the outside world and their competitors. But now it's come back to its great strength and will go stronger and stronger. And I think the same applies to most of the city. Sure, there have been horrible problems and they will continue. Personally, I think that the worst of the lockdown is still to come in the springtime here in the Northern Hemisphere. We were lucky to be facing difficult times with spring and summer are coming and walks outside and so on. Now it's very different. It's a horrible rainstorm outside there just now, both physically and metaphorically. But so there are challenges, big challenges facing everyone. But the way people have responded has been extraordinary, I think. If you look, for instance, at, say, the last time I was in this very floor of Canary Wharf was for a conference on foreign exchange. And when lockdown started, everyone, including senior FX people, said foreign exchange can't be done at home. It's just not going to work. You need the dealing rooms. But that's proven to be not true.
Yes.
With the one or two exceptions, it's worked really well. And even the regulators, who've now moved to Stratford down the railway line, but even they seem to be relatively content for the moment with the way it's running. So the assumption that people needed big office floors with huge numbers of dealing desks, you know this far better than I do, that assumption has now gone. You can do it from home with a bit of backup capacity in the office and so on. We at CISI, most people now work from home, and that's been working very effectively, and people are probably working more efficiently, and I should say longer hours perhaps than they were in the past.
That's the
partly because there's the gain from not commuting.
Yeah.
I think there are probably some question marks over property. Property people will tell you that offices in major financial centres like the city and here are safe investments. Well, not quite so sure about that. But I do think offices will find a new use as a place for people colleagues to come to and work together for some of the week, not all the time. I think the sufferers will be mass transit systems, because no longer will any of us be prepared to get up at 6:15 every morning to be at our desks at 7:15 on a crowded, expensive train and dirty train. We will probably stay at home most of the time and commute at more sensible hours. So I am an eternal optimist, but I feel, given the way people have responded so far to this terrible accident that's happened to us, we will survive and prosper. Certainly the city will, and other major financial centres will too.
Okay, interesting to hear that, and also gratified to hear your optimism. You're quite right, the challenge, certainly from financial institutions, was met quite effectively in terms of working from home, and then the markets, foreign exchange, money markets, etc., have continued without a real blip. They've carried on. So let's look in more detail, moving on from that then. As a bank, if I'm a bank in the City of London, I've seen the changes to working habits, working from home. I've seen the change in customer habits, the way they interact with their financial services provider. What specific actions would a bank, or should a bank be looking to take to meet this challenge in terms of the move to more digital or remote customer working or customer service, and a more remote employee working environment? What specific challenges should a bank be looking or measures rather, measures should a bank be looking to take to meet these challenges, both today and in the medium term, if we assume that what would have happened in 5 years' time has been advanced or brought forward quicker because of lockdown?
I guess we've got to split this between two different sorts of banks, retail banks and commercial and investment
Yes.
banks, very broadly put. On the retail side, I think people have become accustomed to just not going into branches. They rarely go into a branch. I've been into a branch of my bank twice in the past 12 years, once relatively recently to pay in a cheque. You're a young man, but that's a piece of paper with numbers written on it, which
still use
conveys
them,
money.
but I shouldn't have admitted that.
Well, this was a cheque from an American bank, so it took forever to go through the system, because, of course, it could be money laundering. A famous American bank doesn't do money laundering, but they might do. So people rarely go into branches these days, and people have become very accustomed to banking not just on their computers but on their mobile phones. I think most of my transactions these days happen by mobile phone rather than anything else, and I think that probably applies to most people, even old people like me. I mean, you said I'm called senior advisor. That means I'm very old, but most people use mobiles for most of their financing transactions. I think commercial banks are different because there's definitely a need, I think, when you're doing especially big ticket deals, which rely on the trust you referred to earlier.
Yes.
I think you do actually need to see people.
Absolutely.
And it's quite interesting, the people I know who've been most constrained to come into the office during recent months since the summer have been corporate finance people, because there is big concern there about security for obvious reasons, leaving a window at home open when the dustman might pass and hear a name which could turn into a nice little bonus for the dustman, and also where there's a need to eyeball your clients. That said, there was a great talk just before lockdown in early February at the annual conference of Women in Finance, where there were 200 women in the room and 5 blokes. I was privileged to be one of them. And two of these people speaking in the first session were Michael Cole-Fontaine, our chairman at CISI and also chairman of AFME, Association of Financial Markets Europe, and Michael is also a patron of Women in Finance, and James Bardrick, who runs Citi in this time zone. And this was in early February, so before lockdown, when only very senior people like James and Michael were aware of how serious this could become, as it did do quickly. But he had said, and this was in public, otherwise I wouldn't repeat it, that Citi had looked at their travel arrangements and realised that they were probably the biggest non-industrial dumper of carbon in the atmosphere in the world. So they had many people flying around the world all the time doing deals. And he said, and he used the word men here, how many people actually want a team of men to sit in the front of a plane and turn up with the same pitch book trying to sell them something they probably don't want to buy anyway? And it was quite a serious point. And one thing that emerged from that, and I think is beginning to grow, is the power of women. There were some powerful women speaking at this event who really made the point that they didn't want to do things like go to business dinners unless they were absolutely necessary. They didn't want to do the blokish thing of going out with the mates and getting home at midnight and so on, and then getting up at 5 in the morning. They had families to look after and be with and care for and love and so on. And they didn't want to play the old games that men play by staying in the office all day pretending to be busy when maybe not much is happening. And I think that's grown quite dramatically in recent months, that the diversity has changed its image during lockdown, certainly in London and in Edinburgh, where I spend a bit of time too, that, you know, the lip service which was paid to the why of diversity has now turned into the how of diversity.
Right,
how do we make this happen? How do we accept that there are people from many different backgrounds, as you are, and you've written wonderfully about this in the past, that you do need. I don't really particularly care about what colour someone is, obviously, what religion, what gender, sexual orientation, whatever, but it's a diversity of thought which has made the city such a great place.
Yes.
And for instance, in our one of the sadnesses of this lockdown for me is that every first weekend in December for the past decade, I've been representing St. Nicholas, not Father Christmas, but his healthier cousin St. Nicholas in a community garden in Islington, and giving out presents to children and so on. And a lot of the people who live around there work in the city, and the numbers of accents and languages that I hear from these children whose Christmas wishes for 15 Lego sets, or in one case last year, world peace, very sweet.
Very sweet.
The numbers of languages used is just tremendous. I mean, dozens of people working in the city who are really part of our community. So again, optimistic that lockdown has brought changes to the way banks are managed, the governance of banks, and increasing diversity in the people working in them, and in other institutions and insurance companies and accounting firms, law firms, and so on.
And that's actually a potential upside that's coming, or not even potential. We're seeing it as a result of lockdown. So there is some silver lining in that cloud. Okay, one last question for you. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting to hear that, and gratifying, actually, I should say. One last question. You represent the in some form. You're a senior advisor at the CISI, my professional association, as I mentioned. In a nutshell, what could professional associations could they be doing to assist this process, their members, the member firms, their individual members, of advancing the City of London, advancing UK PLC as well? How can the professional association assist with that?
Let me give you an example. There is something called the Green Finance Education Charter, which was signed in June this year between 12 professional bodies, of which we are one. It started with a meeting organised by Sir Roger Gifford, former Lord Mayor, originally Scottish, I'm pleased to say, banker, and now chairman of the Green Finance Institute. And he's a great drum banger for the fact that the financial services sector will help save the planet and the people living on it. Green finance is his life right now. And he managed to knock a bunch of heads together. Getting 2 professional bodies in a room to agree to anything is tricky, but 12 was a masterpiece of negotiation, and it's worked. And what we're trying to do is to deliver knowledge to newcomers to the industry on what responsible finance more generally is about. So in other words, green finance, sustainable finance, ESG, environmental, social and governance, ethical finance, faith-based finance, notably Islamic finance, and to give the basic skills and knowledge that people need when they come into the industry to understand what these very fast-growing and very important areas are about, and then to help them grow with programs of continuing professional development. And we at the CISI, for instance, have really geared up our efforts during lockdown on that key area of responsible finance, as we call it, driven in large part by the demand from clients. A lot of clients, not just millennials, but old people like me, are saying, hang on, I really don't want my money invested in certain types of business anymore. I want it to be used in some proper way. I think the sort of, Mark Carney summed it up in a speech at the Guildhall at the end of February, just before lockdown, talking about the path to COP26, the climate summit due to be held in Glasgow in November this year, now be November 21. Yeah. But he said that when the First World War ended 100 years ago, we in Britain tried to build homes fit for heroes. Now, he said, what we should be doing is keeping a world that's fit for our grandchildren to live on. And that's a key message, I think, is coming through, that professional bodies can actually look to the future with some optimism, some dread, of course. We've all seen those cartoons of a couple of scientists looking into a test tube with a wave of COVID coming over them, saying it'll all be fixed by Christmas, we'll have the vaccine. But behind COVID there's the economic problem, and behind the economic problem there's the climate challenge, and behind the climate challenge there's biodiversity, the lack of biodiversity. The forthcoming report in weeks from Sir Partha Dasgupta of Cambridge will point to the real dangers of ignoring biodiversity, because there are potentially vast economic impacts, far bigger than the virus or the climate challenge, coming in our direction. But I remain optimistic, because we're quite good at surviving and we're quite good at getting things right, muddling our way through, but getting there.
Very glad to hear it, because there's a lot of potential challenges, well, existing challenges behind following up this behind this COVID one. But I share optimism, and very good to hear, as I said, gratifying to hear also the role of the Professional Association in this initiative, all to the good, City of London and UK PLC. And that brings us to the end of this short conversation. Thank you very much for that insight. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Very interesting to hear that. Really good for us to hear that as the BTRM. And that's George Littlejohn. And my thanks to him, and thanks to you for listening. I'll see you again on a BTRM video interview at some point. But in the meantime, my thank you again, George. Appreciate it, and all the best to everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Moorad, very much.